Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Second Parish Friday Nights Live program. I'm Alicia Longwell, and I'm the Louis B. and Dorothy Cullman Chief Curator here at the parish. We really miss seeing you in person, but we're happy to be able to come together every Friday night at 5 with our new online series. Firstly, I'd like to thank our wonderful sponsors for the Friday nights. Most especially the presenting sponsor, Bank of America, in addition, the Corcoran Group, and Sandy and Stephen Pearlbinder. Now, while we're together tonight, if you want to ask a question, look down at the bottom of your screen. It says Q&A, and you can type it in at any point during the presentation. And then at the end, I'd be delighted to answer as many questions as I can as the time we have. So tonight's presentation is really about the parish's collection of William Merritt Chase paintings, the renowned American Impressionist painter, and specifically about his time working and living in the Shinnecock Hills just outside of Southampton, and there with his family and his students, and looking at the relationship between them and their neighbors, the peoples of the Shinnecock Nation. So we'll start the PowerPoint.
I'm Alicia Longwell. I'm the Louis B. and Dorothy Cullman Chief Curator of Art and Education here at the Parish Art Museum. Our new Herzog and Dimmeron design building is located in Watermill, New York, a hamlet just to the east of Southampton Village on Long Island's East End. This is the first time that we've had dedicated space to show our permanent collection and to have a dedicated gallery to the work of William Merritt Chase. The parish collection is really notable for its range of work from all periods, especially from the Shinnecock paintings when he was here, and is the largest collection in a public institution in America. William Merritt Chase had a long and rich relationship to the East End of Long Island. You might even say that he staked his claim to this landscape early on and that he saw more possibilities in it than the untutored eye. He once said that he could find pictorial gold in the dross of the Shinnecock Hills. It was in many ways a scrubby landscape, one that had been greatly overlooked by many other artists. He first came out to Eastern Long Island in 1881 to sketch en plein air. Chase adopted not so much what you might call the techniques of the French Impressionists, but certainly their ideas of coming out and painting modern life. In 1891, two civic-minded women in the Southampton area decided they'd like to start a plein air school of art. Chase was a very well-known teacher at the Art Students League. He was a renowned portrait painter, and he readily accepted their invitation to come out and in 1891 be the founding director of the Shinnecock Hills Summer School of Art. By the next summer, a house had been built for him, this beautiful Dutch colonial revival, shingle style that's become very famous and ubiquitous here on the East End, and his whole family came out. He taught here till 1902, and then the family continued to use the house in Shinnecock really up to Chase's death in 1916. The William Merritt Chase Archives at the Parish Art Museum is a repository of documents, letters, and most especially 600 photographs that really document the artist's life. Many of the photographs were, we know, taken by Mrs. Chase. She was an amateur photographer. They give an extraordinary glimpse into what you might call a Gilded Age summer, but really more importantly into Chase's life and work. These photographs particularly are extremely important because many of the same scenes that Chase depicted are visible in the photographs. Chase is indelibly associated with the paintings that he did here in the Shinnecock Hills. Our own painting, 1895, the Bayberry Bush, is really emblematic of these, and he really did find pictorial gold in this scrubby landscape. I think one of the most interesting things about that painting is, of course, the presence of the house that they lived in, the three daughters. It is a complete look at the artist and his life, I think. having the domestic realm, the landscape realm. There is perhaps no better entry into the creative life of William Merritt Chase than this painting we see here, Alice in the Shinnecock studio from around 1900. Alice Judine Chase, his oldest daughter, was often depicted by Chase in his paintings. Alice is really a surrogate for the viewer, inviting us into the rarefied atmosphere of the artist's studio. While the nominal subject of the painting is the studio, the true theme is painting itself. Here we see so many objects that become a self-portrait for the artist. The Shinnecock painting on the easel, the luminous glow of the bric-a-brac that he collected, his upended paintbrushes, the sketch of Velázquez in the upper left, and the light coming through the studio window. It's a complex fusion of art with family, landscape, and the material world. I think Chase was very much a student, you might say, of the light here on the East End. He was extraordinarily aware of the light at all times, and his painting is infused with that perception. We would welcome your visit when you're out on the East End of Long Island to come to the museum in Watermill, New York, just to the east of Southampton Village.
Well, that gave a wonderful introduction to the PowerPoint. I failed to mention that's, of course, the wonderful film that Channel 13 and New York Arts did for us some years back. I will say, looking at it again, it really doesn't tell the whole story. And that is, of course, the relationship with his neighbors in the Shinnecock Hills. And I think we'll start the slideshow now. The pictures there are the paintings by Chase that we exhibited in the recent exhibition, Chase in the Shinnecock Hills, and what a story that had unfolded since that first tape that was made was really in my conversations with the wonderful artist curator and historian David Bunn Martine, whose home is on the Shinnecock Reservation. Many things from a book that he read called Time and Memory about his growing up there and his ancestors on the reservation, and the life that unfolds there is in many ways very much a part of the Chase and the Chase School and his time there on the East End. Next. These are two maps of the Shinnecock Hills. On the left is the one from the early 19th century. You'll see that all the lands between the Shinnecock Bay and the Great Peconic Bay are historic Shinnecock lands. The map on the right is about 80, 90 years later. It's more towards the end of the 19th century. You'll see the little line that's the train, which the tracks had been led, where it says Sag Harbor branch, the branch that went off to Sag Harbor. And the Shinnecock lands, the Shinnecock had been pushed to the peninsula. You see out into Shinnecock Bay. Those were and to this day, the 800 acres of the reservation. Chase's house that was built, the one you saw in the painting, the bayberry bush, is, if you see on the map where it says Sugarloaf, that was the position of the house. And the art village that was built for the school is down sort of just south of where it says Tuckahoe on the map, and just north of the reservation lands, the Shinnecock, and he would have passed by those lands every day that he went down to the art village. What's interesting, in 1893, he and Mrs. Chase had a fourth daughter, Hazel, and they gave her middle name as Nemog, which in the Shinnecock language means the land between the waters, really showing an example really of Chase's and Mrs. Chase's connection to the Shinnecock. I mentioned David Bunn Martine, and in conversations over the years, he did a talk at the museum and showed the slide on the right. Now, I've always wondered in the slide on the left of the bayberry bush, how these three young girls kept from their dresses, their starch white dresses being, snagged in the thorny bayberry bush. And David's photograph of some of his forebears, great aunts and great grandmother, in these extraordinary leg of mutton blouses. And he said that they often were employed by the summer colonists, as they call the summer estate holders, and also the houses that had begun to be built in the Shinnecock Hills, that they were employed as the seamstresses and laundresses. And in those days, Mrs. Chase had 8 children and would have certainly taken advantage of the proximity to these wonderful women. The art school that was started was part of a real estate venture, really. This is the train station in Shinnecock Hills that was built to encourage settlement of that area. Houses were built. This also contained a post office, and not surprisingly, brochures for the summer art school. And one of the things that was touted about the school was that it full of rich material for the artists, old fences, tangles of roses, and picturesque boats, sketching on the reservation with permission. And also, if they wanted to ask someone on the reservation to be a model, Chase was insistent that they be paid. And that was one of the first relationships that he started. The 1892 layout on the right is of the Art Village. And it was, as I say, a venture to have houses, the houses for the artists. As you can see, it was a pretty barren landscape at that point, ripe for development, you might say. In the right-hand slide, on the far right, in that image is the studio building that was built for the school, where classes were held on rainy days and critiques once a week. Thank you. This is the brochure, one of the brochures for the Summer School of Art. They touted the fresh vegetables, the fresh milk, and everything, fresh water as well, everything that was near to supply the Art Village, where many of the young men lived in more dormitory style, and the women often came with their you might say, their chaperones from the South, and lived in their own houses built there in Art Village. At that time, the houses on the reservation had long been, they were not the indigenous dwellings. They're the wonderful shingle style that you see. This is David Martine's great-grandfather, Charles Bunn. And on the left is William Merritt Chase, of course, on the front porch of his house in the Shinnecock Hills. Sort of remarkable similarity, I think, in the two houses and the two men with their dogs. Mrs. Chase, as was mentioned, was an amateur, really wonderful, more than an amateur photographer. This is a penny postcard on the left that was developed for her at the Morris Studio in Southampton, right on Main Street. An old whaling tub there on the front lawn, now as a flower pot. She, as I said, had help from many of the women of the Shinnecock Reservation, and here they are preserving and canning, which is something David pointed out his family always did. There was also a lace making workshop developed on the reservation at one point, and here's Mrs. Chase out drying the lace collars on the lawn. This is a wonderful diagram from David's family of the Bunn family farm. They were, lots of the Shinnecock had what's sometimes called market gardens. They grew for sale, corn, a lovely orchard with apples, cherries, pears, probably some of which were what Mrs. Chase was canning. Muscovy ducks were raised, chicken broilers, everything. So this was the really epicenter for that section, for the new residents of the Shinnecock Hills who came in summer colonists, as they were called by the Shinnecock. But this relation did develop over time. This is a painting of Chase's from 1894, The Pot Hunter. I had always thought it was, well, a pot hunter is a hunter who goes out to look for just something to put in a stew and have for his dinner, bring home to the family. Really seemed to me in some further research, and of course, as I said, David Martine's book, that the men of the Shinnecock Nation, after they were the great whalers and traveled far and wide across the globe with ships, but after that, certainly the whaling business ended, they put their skills to good work. They were, of course, extraordinary hunters, fishers, and served as often as guides too to the summer colonists, so to speak. So this might well be a painting on the old sand road of a Shinnecock man out for something for his pot. This is Charles Bunn, David's great-grandfather. As you can see, he had his professional business card. A special attention, I love this, given to instruction of young boys in handling firearms. Here he is on the left at a powwow. He was also an extraordinary carver of decoys, one of the greatest in our American heritage, and he was very well known for that. On the left, there he is with a client with a very big rifle to go out and hunt in the hills. This is a wonderful picture. This is Charles Bunn. He's at the National Sportsman's Show at the old Madison Square Garden. Now, he would have gone to the Shinnecock Hills train station, brought all his decoys, and gone in to sell them over a period of time at Madison Square Garden. Wonderful. On the right is a painting by Reynolds Beale, well-known American Impressionist painter who was also a student of Chase's in this time in the one of the early students in the early 1890s. The painting on the right is called Captain Harlow's Lot, another hunter. He certainly heeded Chase's admonition to paint what you see, and that is what he saw. Apparently, he and some other young men in the school, you'll see that upper right, rented Mrs. Harlow's corn crib for the summer. If you see there, not unlike today when almost everything is available for sale or for rent for the summer, Mrs. Harlow cleaned out her corn crib and accommodated several of the young male students. There's a very funny sign there over the door. You may not be able to read it, but it says the Rembrandt, which is quite a send up because the Rembrandt was one of the original fabulous artist studio buildings built in New York. Not quite the Rembrandt, but they loved it there. That's a photograph by Reynolds Beale, actually. Again, the pot hunter, and upper right, just to show you some of Mrs. Chase's really beautiful photographs. This is the youngest daughter, Mary Content, born in 1902. She's on the Old Stone Road there as well, which is the path that Chase often painted. The Shinnecock Hills, the new summer colony there, all made very good copy. That's a weekly newspaper on the right. Chase would demonstrate en plein air for the students as well, and that always drew a crowd even more than the students to come and see. And here they are. It's often said that Chase would take he had a buggy which he took down from Sugarloaf down to the Art Village, and that the students would sort of gather in gaggles right on the side of the road. There's a very good image of it right there, so that they perhaps would be able, the master would be able to see what they were working on. Apparently one time a young artist turned around and said, "But Mr. Chase, what do we paint in this scrubby landscape?" And he assured them there was gold in the dross of the Shinnecock Hills. So paint they did. On the right, lower right, is the studio building in Art Village with that extraordinary fieldstone fireplace. Critiques were held quite often, student work. They were apparently highly sought invitations for local people to come and watch this. It was Mr. Chase put on quite a demonstration too, his so-called 5-minute sketches sometimes. As you can see in the top, the art village, those Shinnecock Hills began to look a lot more populated. There's a windmill operating to bring up water, and it became quite settled as a summer, mostly summer residence at that point. As I said, Chase admonished his students to paint what you know. On the left is a work by Arthur Burdett Frost, who was actually probably better known as an illustrator, but he, at a rather advanced age, not a young student, came out to Shinnecock for the summer. He said he wanted to loosen up his hand. And I think what's most, of course, striking is the view to the water, which is he's doubtless on the Shinnecock Reservation painting, and sort of that remarkable palette, very similar, of course, to Chase's work. And it's, he was doing just as the maestro said, paint what you see. This is a painting on the right by Zella DeMillo of the Old Sand Road. That's a Chase on the left. DeMillo was quite a colorful student of Chase's. She stayed on long after her student days are over, actually, and she became an accomplished artist. She's here. She built a house, or rather hired Catherine Budd. You see lower right, who was also a student at Shinnecock, more interested in design and architecture. She was a established architect early on, early at the turn of the century, and was commissioned by Zella to build this house, a wonderful house in the art village that you see upper right. Zella had quite an ongoing relationship with the reservation. She had many friends there. She was, in fact, so beloved that she was made an honorary Shinnecock, and they gave her the name Chiola, which means she who laughs. She was apparently quite a humorous and good-natured person, and what's wonderful is she decided to name her house Laugh-A-Lot. Like Camelot, but Laugh-A-Lot. Very colorful figure. She drove an ambulance in World War I, but came back and lived out her days in the art village. Wonderful photographs of Mrs. Chase, these extraordinary summers that the Chase family spent in the Shinnecock Hills, almost always with a succession of Russian wolfhounds that you see there. This kind of freedom and open air and swimming and sports was really quite new, quite different from the Victorian childhoods, you might say. And the Chase children were encouraged to play outdoors in all sorts of ways. They were all great swimmers, taught to swim at an early age. One of the outdoor sports that, of course, came to Shinnecock Hills was in 1892. A group of consortium of golfers decided they would build a golf course, golf club there. They hired McKim, Mead, and White, of course, the architects du jour of the Gilded Age, and this beautiful clubhouse was built. They looked no farther than the Shinnecock Reservation to find men who would help to build this, particularly the landscape and grounds. These were, of course, historic historic Shinnecock lands, and the men who worked there had a real reverence for this, and their legacy really is to have built this landscape there. And many of the men who worked on the landscape and the building stayed on to play golf, teach golf, become golf pros. One of the first U.S. Opens was in 1896 at Shinnecock. The picture here is of Oscar Bunn, and the brother of Charles Bunn, so great uncle of David Martins. He was a noted golf professional, and they began as caddies, but went on to be extraordinarily demand, and Oscar Bunn traveled the world instructing in golf. In 1896, when the Open was there, there was a movement to ban the Native Americans from playing, and the Shinnecock and the Southampton Golfing Association said they will play here, and whether you want to or whether you play here or not, they are playing here. And so they were in that first competition at Shinnecock, the U.S. Open in 1896. This is a beautiful drawing on the right of a young Shinnecock girl that William Merritt Chase did. I think it makes an interesting pairing with this portrait of Chase's daughter, Dorothy, on the left. Often at the art studio, they did tableau vivant, and Chase always from his travels would bring back exotic costumes. And this is one that Dorothy has worn. This very beautiful portrait of the young Shinnecock girl. I think it's interesting. I just want to, there was a quote that I ran across at one point of an art reviewer who reviewed this very portrait of Dorothy. And I think what he says could equally be applied to the beautiful portrait of, her name is Romaine, the young Shinnecock girl. So the reviewer, talking about the portrait of Dorothy, says, a young girl who senses the awakened conscience of a girlhood just making itself felt. It's quite beautiful. I wanted to close an interesting moment. A man named Rodman Wanamaker, a scion of the Wanamaker department store family in Philadelphia, took it upon himself to begin an expedition across the United States. He wanted to, his name was Rodman Wanamaker, he really wanted to make a count of the Indian tribes. He wanted the Indian tribes really to feel that they were part of the American nation. And to that end, he, various ceremonies were held as he went around across the country. He made 3 expeditions, took photographs everywhere. He, in 1913, the last tribe to be visited, and this was the 3rd and last expedition, a total of 169 tribes were recorded. He came in his private railroad car to the Shinnecock Hills and alighted there and went to the Shinnecock Reservation, where he and his photographers and ethnographers basically made these extraordinary photographs, really, almost in the beautiful photo secession style that was very popular at the period of the Shinnecock people. This is a beautiful young woman, Justine Callas. Again, it's the sort of profile and full face, which is pretty standard ethnographic photography, but this certainly transcends that moment. So at every reservation, each tribe that was visited of the 169, a flag was raised, and basically some fealty was required, some from the tribe members, and the flag was raised and saluted. Wanamaker really wanted to have on the left is the proposal for a monument to the American Indian. It was to be built on Staten Island at Fort Wadsworth, a $500,000 project at the time. Apparently with the bronze statue at the top would be higher than the Statue of Liberty. It never came to be, but funds never were voted by Congress, actually. But the record of this expedition is one of great interest, and very interesting that it was sort of concluded in the Shinnecock Hills. So that is looking, as I said, with Chase and his family and the students, all the relations and all the ways they interacted with the Shinnecock people. And I hope it's been an interesting moment to look at this evening. Let's see, can I tell if there are questions? I'm a little new at this. Look at that. I'm going to read this off Do we know what music is being performed underneath the PowerPoint? I'm embarrassed to say no, I do not, but I can find out. Anonymous. That would be interesting. Music is always wonderful. And of course, the producers at New York Arts did a wonderful job. Next, from Sue McD, is the Chase Connection permanently at the parish or on loan? No, it is in our permanent collection. We do, for very, very special occasions, loan out some of the work. It has to be very important to show. The latest was, of course, a major retrospective of Chase's work, the first one in some 30 years, that the Phillips Collection and the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston, organized. So we always participate when we can to important exhibitions like that. Thank you for these questions. Mr. Halsey, at some point, can you talk about John Singer Sargent's influence on William Merritt Chase? Well, I can. That's a whole other talk, actually. Very, very interesting. I mean, Chase, Sargent, Whistler, of the three, of course, Chase was the one who was a thorough Midwesterner, spent time in Germany being studying at the Royal Academy, but came right back home and did not, he often said he didn't study in Paris because he didn't want to be seduced by the frippery of what was going on there. So he came right back home and spent his life really here. And so he's differs from those other two great Americans who were expatriates, Americans who never really lived here. It makes an interesting story. They were certainly in salons together in Europe, and it would be fun to do that, maybe next time. But thank you for asking. Let's see, any more questions? Oh, Cindy. Were these photos taken by Mrs. Chase? The Native women seem to be modernized in their hair and clothing. Was that suggested? Well, not all of the photographs. Certainly the blue cyanotypes, which was a sort of like a Kodak, early Kodak method process. The Native women, well, many of the, most of the time, the Shinnecock dressed in contemporary attire. Certainly the, at the powwow or Native dress is worn, but their hair, I don't think it would have been suggested. I think that is, how they were. Those last set of the profiles and full-face photographs were not by Mrs. Chase, though. That was from the ethnographers coming. Kara Whitman. Yeah, thank you. Fabulous. Oh, what happened to the Art Village? That's a good one. Thank you, Cindy. It's right there. Most of the houses are beautifully restored. They're all in private hands. It's pretty well, it's kept a little bit under the radar because the last thing they need is, tour buses tootling down the little very narrow little streets. But it's not hard to find. It's just really across from the Shinnecock lands. And you can very quietly drive through and see some of the houses there. Wonderful names to some of the streets that were developed there, like Ochre or Sienna. It was very arty. But yes, many of them are still there, beloved. We're in the same hands. The studio was in the same hands for many, many years. Will you also do Fairfield Porter? I'd love to. That would be fun. Thank you. Jeremy. Hey, Jeremy. Thank you. Are any of the Rodman Wanamaker photos in the parish collection? No, they're not. I've really only seen them. They're in historic collections like the Library of Congress. And I have not seen the originals. I'm sure they're very beautiful, but I've only seen the reproductions. Thank you, Jeremy. Jackie, are you streaming from home? Yes, I am. Do you like my plant? plant came from the museum at one point. Yes, I am, right here in Sag Harbor. Cindy. I live on Tuckahoe Road. This is from Alexis, just past the golf course. How far from here would his house have been? His house, which you can't see now, but if you go down to Sugarloaf, the street that goes, it's just up that road. It's sort of overgrown now. It doesn't look a thing like it did then when it was sort of clear cut and the big bayberry bushes, but it is down Sugarloaf Road. Anonymous, many of the buildings in Art Village, yes, still there. Visited, there may be an occasional house tour, maybe one of the Historical Society or library, I don't know. But it's a rare treat, but they're not generally open for visiting. Hi, Jackie Black. Susan wants to know, did the Shinnecock interact much with the rest of the community in Southampton, or was the relationship with the Chases and the school an anomaly? I wouldn't call it an anomaly. I think they were involved with, I say this theme goes back to the summer colonists. There were big estates in the area. As you may know, the Atterbury built quite, Grosvenor Atterbury built quite a number of big houses that were used there. I mean, people, the Remingtons were there. People came from all over the country, people of certain means who wanted to come here and enjoy the beauty of this area. So I think the produce was taken into Southampton and sold as well. But I think there was a lot of interchange between the people that actually were living in the Shinnecock Hills. See, can you, Sue, can you show any more paintings by Chase? Was his motif oil? Yes, he painted in oil, as was typical at that time. What had been invented, certainly by the middle of the 19th century, the 18th century was, the 19th century, excuse me, was oil paint that came in tubes, so you could take them with you. You've probably seen paint boxes, square about this big, and you could have a pallet that packed in there and an array of tubes of paint, so you could go out in the air, en plein air. Did any of the kids become artists? No, they didn't. His last, there are a couple of granddaughters who were still with us, and now to my knowledge, through that generation, no one became an artist. There might be greats that I'm not familiar with, but I hope I will. Thank you, HHM. Bill, all right, very kind. Oh, thank you. Kim, it was a lovely distraction. Oh, well, it was wonderful for me. Melody, would you like to thank you very much. This is terrific. The feedback, it's great. Can you tell me about the painting at the seaside? I don't know that particular painting. Certainly, many of the paintings that he did were on the Shinnecock Bay. That's where they sort of came down from the hills, and the wonderful images that you see of the great big umbrellas and everyone sort of fully clothed except for the children, really, taking the air and sitting under the big umbrellas. I do know that those were at that was their bay, where it comes down the hill, and it's right on, right on the grade there of the beach in the Shinnecock Bay. I'm going to remember them always. Thank you. This is great. I believe that's all. The Wizard of Oz is out there running this program. It's been a real pleasure for me. Don't forget, every Friday at 5, we're going to have something very, very interesting, very topical, to let you know what we are doing as we work remotely, and sending best wishes to all for health, be safe, and look forward to seeing you soon. Bye-bye.